I'm very excited to introduce this panel. I've had a chance to speak and present with several of the members of this panel before on the issue of digital identity and authentication. I won't even attempt to introduce those concepts because our panelists are going to present them much more clearly and with much greater expertise. But suffice it to say, this is an integral part of the API economy, and I look forward to Ryan, Kyle, and colleagues taking us through this and sharing with us what they've learned thus far. So without further ado, allow me to welcome our panelists.
Thank you, Denny. Aren't we lucky to have Mickey Tripathi as our national coordinator? We are so lucky to have him. Great to see you. So happy. We could have listened to him for 2 hours. I know I could. All right, so my panelists are here. Adam apologizes. He got asked to do something by the White House. I said, well, I guess the White House trumps WEDI. Sorry, guys, but that's kind of the way that it goes. We'll present Adam's slide here. We've done this a few times now. But let me just tell you a little bit about kind of what we do. I work at Levitt Partners. Levitt Partners does something really unique. It was founded by former Secretary Mike Levitt about 14 years ago, focusing on getting multi-sector stakeholders together to solve really difficult issues in healthcare, very similar to WEDI. We're not a not-for-profit. We're actually a for-profit. It's a business line that we have, and we get, hopefully, people to pay for us if we develop a good enough value proposition. And we then go out and try to implement effective federal policy. So when we go to the Hill, unlike some other industry groups, we go through a multi-stakeholder perspective, again, very similar to WEDI, and say this is a very narrow and deep topic that we feel really strongly about. He wrote a book about it if you were really interested in it. There's actually it's part art, part science as well to make that happen. So we started this CARIN Alliance. I think folks are probably aware of it. Mickey mentioned it as well. They mentioned it in the HL7 meeting yesterday, so I won't go through it in detail, focusing exclusively on how individual consumers and their caregivers can be able to use, share, and access their digital health information where, when, and how they want to achieve their goals. And when we first started, we said, man, it would be so cool if we could actually get the data and then write the data back into the database. And somebody very wisely said, why don't we just figure out a way to get the data first? Here we are 8.5 years later, we still haven't figured out a way to get the data. We're still here, and WEDI's still here, right? We're still trying to all do this together to make this happen. We've got about 80 organizations focused on this. I would tell you, though, here's the really interesting part here, is that because of the patient access rules, this group that we have is the most mature group in the country on implementing FHIR. By far. They have these little group of 31 applications now that we have that have signed our CARIN Code of Conduct. I think it's 32, one came in this morning. But they are a small but mighty. They know all of the details around API endpoint registries and logos coming back from different endpoints and how to find the endpoints, how to register, what's best practices around registration. These are all things that the payer and provider community are going to have to figure out if the 2026 rule goes live the way that we think it's going to live with CMS. So come to us, not just for patient access, but come to us for best practices around FHIR. And when I say that, you can go to our website. All this stuff is publicly available in terms of what we've learned over the course of the last 8.5 years. All right, let me tell you our problem. And I'm going to start to break down some barriers here, okay? Everyone says, well, myth number one, HIPAA is the most secure environment we have in the country for exchanging healthcare data. That is actually a myth. That is not true. And I'm going to explain why here in a second. And I'm going to kind of break people's mindsets in terms of how we think about this. It is the regulated way in which we send data back and forth to each other. It has been around since '96. We have a security and privacy rule around it. It is important, but it is the floor, not the ceiling. That's what I want to make sure folks understand. It is a floor. It is the absolute thing that we all have to do to just play in the healthcare game. What I'm saying is we shouldn't stop there. We need to improve upon that. We don't need to go back to it. We need to improve upon that. Then there is another regulated space called the Federal Trade Commission. Section 5A of the Federal Trade Commission Act basically says that you can do no harm to the consumer. And the apps, the health and wellness apps, there's about 52,000 on Google Store, on Google Play and the Apple Store. Those health and wellness apps fall into that FTC environment. Oh, by the way, health-related social needs all of that data is also in this FTC space, okay? Nobody that I know of has said, I think it's a great idea to go get a homeless shelter HHS certified. They should pay the $100,000 to get HHS certified, except California, which is a whole nother story, which I'm not understanding exactly. But there's nobody really that's doing that. And so we have to have a protected environment in the FTC space, because if we're looking at whole person care, we have to figure out a way to get the data moving from HIPAA to the FTC space, and from the FTC space back to HIPAA. We have to do this as a country, okay? There's many different Medicaid demonstration waivers out there that have to do with homelessness data and other specific data on supplemental benefits, all of that stuff in order for us to do that. Remember, as of January 1st, every CMS provider in the entire country is going to ask health-related social needs questions. I am extraordinarily nervous about January 1st, because when that happens, people are going to be asked some of the most sensitive questions we have ever asked in the history of healthcare. And when we do that, we're going to then tell people, let's see if we can find you help, and then we're going to refer them to a community-based organization. And the community-based organization is going to accept them as much as they can, and then they're going to start turning people away. And they're going to turn people away because they're going to say, we don't have enough resources to meet the demand that is out there. Now, the next question I have is anyone going to continue to answer those questions in the future if they get turned away based on the most sensitive information they give to the provider? I am very nervous about that. So we have to start having a national conversation about how we're going to transfer funding from a whole person care perspective. ACO REACH is starting that process, not only from healthcare, but also in the SDOH space too. We have to have that conversation, otherwise we're gonna be in trouble. All right, little editorial. So what's our safe spot in the FTC space? Well, the safe spot is exactly what you heard Mickey talk about, which is TEFCA. TEFCA requires individual access service providers, which are these consumer-facing apps, to be HIPAA privacy and security, to follow HIPAA privacy and security regs. Remember, that's the floor. So if you voluntarily join TEFCA as a consumer-facing app, which most of them are, then you are going to have HIPAA privacy and security protections. That's why blue and red make purple. There you go. That is taking the best of both worlds. The other thing that it's doing is they are signing on to the CARIN Code of Conduct, which exceeds HIPAA privacy and security requirements. It has GDPR, right to be forgotten, CCPA, ADPPA. We could go through the whole list of acronyms, but it has all of those things protected in it. And it uses internet-based standards, and it's privacy protected, and it's consent-based data sharing, and it's consumer controlled. That means that that purple environment is more protected, more privacy preserving, more security enhancing, all of those things than we have today in HIPAA. That purple box is what we want to get more apps into. That's the goal. The goal is to figure out how we can increase the privacy, security, and consent-based standards, not decrease them. Well, the only way that we're going to do that is finding out ways where we can identity proof the individual, and that individual can take that identity proof credential and use it wherever they want. We have a problem with identity in this country, as folks know, and we're going to tell you how we're going to solve that today. So, what does this look like in real life? Well, I have on my phone, I won't show it to you because of time, but Georgia is one of the states that have gone live with mobile driver's license. So when I go to the TSA, I have Clear, so I have, I do my eyes and go through that stuff, but I can also use TSA's pre-check idea, and then I can use their mobile driver's license opportunity, where all I do is take the mobile driver's license that's in my Apple Wallet, and I can double click on it, tap it on the TSA little device that's there, and speed right through security. Mobile driver's license is something, in these states at least, you can download today onto your phone. The ability to take that physical driver's license, put it in a digital concept, in a digital wallet, and then be able to use it wherever you want. Well, my question to you is, why would I ever want to identity proof myself again? Isn't that highly unsecure? Usernames and passwords that are, by the way, all on the dark web. Every single one of your usernames and passwords are all on the dark web. I'm sorry to tell you that, but it's only a matter of time that you're going to get some type of an identity type situation. We need to figure out a better way to be able to link this all together using these mobile credentials. So in the commercial world, There is also these credentialing service providers. We've got 2 on the stage with us today, which allow for us to then get identity proofed. 85 million Americans have at least 2 of them, an ID.me or a Clear account today. And you can use that account, or you should be able to voluntarily use that account anywhere in healthcare. It makes a ton of sense. Now, keep in mind what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm talking about identity proofing individuals. I am not talking about patient matching. Those are 2 very separate and distinct problems, and patient matching is a symptom of a larger problem, which is digital identity. Patient matching means I've got garbage in my system and I'm comparing it with the other garbage in my system. Let's see if those 2 garbage piles actually match, right? Because they're out of date, right? There's no single source of truth. We've been trying to do this without the patients for years. Now we're saying, I have a source of truth. It's the mobile driver's license. It's the identity credential. I can now link it to that source of truth, and now I can find out a way to be able to scale that within my organization. So it's a login with type situation. And you've seen this in your consumer life with what's called an IL1 credential, like login with Google or login with Facebook. That's called an IL1 credential, a NIST IL1 credential. An IL2 credential is one of these organizations we have on the stage, and then others that are actually on there. That is happening today at scale, both remotely and in person. And we've been working on this for 5 years, so I'm taking 5 years worth of work and trying to condense it into 30 minutes. What is that going to enable us to do? Well, one of the things it's going to enable us to do is we have another standard called the Smart Health Card Standard and the CARIN Digital Insurance Card Implementation Guide, which is the payload for Smart Health Card, where you can be able to take your digital insurance card and have all of that information digitally on your phone and upload that to your provider so you're not filling out a ridiculous amount of paperwork every time you go into the doctor's office. WEDI has had a clipboard initiative that was, this is the actual implementation in FHIR of that clipboard idea. So now online registration becomes the killer use case, right? The patient, before they come, and folks say, again, this is not a 100% solution, but I will tell you that 95% of Medicaid patients actually have a smartphone. So it's very ubiquitous in our world today. They can go online, they can get identity proofed, they can aggregate all of their healthcare information, they can share their digital insurance card with their provider, and they can schedule an online appointment. You tell me how much burden that's going to relieve off provider staffs and how much ability, where we talk about revenue cycle management, where that starts to be able to streamline across the board. It's transformative, and that is all being piloted starting next year. We're working with the major wallet vendors as well as a lot of the health plans to actually, you'll see that come online beginning next year. So, well, I went backwards instead of forwards. That's not good. It's like interoperability, though. You have to go backwards before you go forwards, right? That's what's going on. So what did we do? Way back in 2020, and we worked on it for about 2 years before this, we wrote a paper. It's on our website. You can read it. That talks about how we would do identity federation. Not just how I prove my identity at one single data holder, but how do I take that one credential and actually use that one credential anywhere in the country? I can take my Humana credential and log into Intermountain, or I can take my Intermountain credential and log into Elevance. It doesn't matter. I can log in anywhere because I can log in with an identity-proof credential. And the paper goes into detail about how we're thinking about this. And the core of the paper is the following. You go out and get one of these identity providers if you're a data holder, making sure you have one of these IL2 credential solutions in place. When you do that, you're going to get certified by a third party, like Conterra or DirectTrust that we have on here. Those third parties will certify those identity-proof credentialing providers. And then, because of the different technologies, there's a PKI-based technology and an API-based technology, we need some type of a policy mechanism to tie those together. And Kyle's going to talk about that. But we spent the last 2 years and wrote 100 pages, and it's all online, about how we would actually connect all of those things together. We said, well, that's great on paper. How do we actually test it? We've got to test it through a proof of concept. So again, last year, we spent a bunch of time, spent the entire year actually, getting a whole bunch of people together to try to test this. Now, in order for us to test it, we actually had to have a trust framework that actually worked. So Kyle's going to talk about our trust framework that we have developed together.
Thanks, Ryan. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. First one of these mics that's being used so far. Ryan described the need for a trust framework. This is not a new concept in healthcare. In fact, what was talked about earlier was the IHE protocol being used to tie the QHINs together and be able to allow health information to exchange. Right now, DirectTrust is the underpinning of that. We have a trust framework today that allows all that to work. Each one of those participants has a credential that allows them to communicate with everyone else in the network. What Ryan's talking about is something a little bit different, though. We're talking about these credential service providers, which operate with a different kind of technology. But we felt that the governance structure of how to manage and accredit these credential service providers shouldn't really differ. The technology is different, but the governance can be the same. There's no reason not to recycle that. Thank you. So ultimately, okay, yes, much better. I can hear myself now. So ultimately, what you'll see here is a slide that I don't have time to go through. I usually go through each one, but I don't think we can afford that today. So in broad strokes, the 6 sort of general areas that you see in this slide, this hexagon, are the core concepts that currently exist in healthcare for health information exchange. And we carried those over to this new policy, but instead of applying it to PKI, as Ryan described, we applied it to APIs, OpenID Connect, these other types of providers that operate on a different kind of technology that's more agreeable to patients for individual access services. So effectively, Kintara and DirectTrust, convened through the CARIN Alliance, came together to create this policy document that contemplates how these identity providers are going to be secured and can be trustworthy to various healthcare organizations that would rely on their attestation of a patient's identity credential, and then be able to federate that identity across any healthcare institution, whether it's a payer or a provider, et cetera. So that's the basis of what this policy is, and it's intended to allow both DirectTrust and Kintara to have interoperability between each other. So an accredited credential service provider in one trust framework can be used by a relying party in a different one, by a healthcare organization or data holder in another. So effectively, this is a sort of a policy structure, and then we're working on the technology that also makes that happen, and that to a large extent is what the CARIN proof of concept was testing out.
So this is a sample set of the folks that we had involved in that proof of concept. One of them, as we mentioned, is the Department of Health and Human Services. They have a technology, which we'll talk about here in a second, called XMS, that acts as an identity broker service related to this. But we had a bunch of credentialing service providers associated with that, a number of different relying parties, and said, how do we do this? And we came up with really 4 different use cases for how identity federation could work both now and in the future. And we're going to go through each of those 4 use cases. The first one is really what we call CSP standalone use cases. Kyle, you want to talk about this one a bit?
Yeah, I think the right way to describe this is minimum viable product. We kind of wanted to use this as a baseline under which to compare all the rest of the use cases. So this occurs today. IDMe, as an example, is a credential service provider that serves healthcare organizations. The reason we call it standalone is because IDMe is not connected to other credential service providers. They can serve multiple organizations, though. So somebody could, for example, get an IDMe credential and use that across multiple different healthcare institutions. But that doesn't mean that you have coverage across the entire country, and that's really what our goal is. So this first use case was basically to describe what occurs today and allow us to juxtapose that with the other types of use cases we'll talk about later.
So we wanted to give you some real-life examples of kind of what this looks like, and Providence is one example of where this has been implemented, and they've had remarkable ROIs, and they've actually spun out a company related to identity proofing. So I'm going to have Robin talk about Praia and the work that they are doing, and as a result of what they have done at Providence.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So with Providence, really what we're trying to do is bring the credentialing that Ryan's talking about into a real-world scenario. So if you are a Providence patient today and you are logging into your account on Providence, you're using a solution that's compatible with what Ryan's talking about. It is OIDC Connect. It is entirely focused around creating a compliant, standards-based identity solution. And we have separated identity from our EMR. So you don't log in with Epic when you go to Providence, you log in with Providence. And you log in with that Providence login across the entire Providence ecosystem. So it allows us to control the identity, control the user experience, and control the brand, frankly, as we go through that process. And we also do identity validation on that credential. So when you log in or register through Providence, You verify you are who you say you are. You do a KYC process like you would for a financial institution and get that IL2 certification. And we add you into our system. You can log into our entire network. Because we are a healthcare provider, we're also thinking about that from the patient experience. So how does that feel really good to the patient as they're going through that process? And we made it so it feels to them basically no different. It's actually faster than the old Epic registration process to go through that process and get into a verified credential. If you're in an in-person situation, you go to a clinic, you don't have any sort of online access yet, they can verify and check your identity for you as you're checking in for your appointment. If you've gone to any sort of clinic recently, you've given them your ID already anyway, so you're used to this process. And all they're doing is creating that token for you to send out to you to do an instant activation link. So when you get back to your phone, you get back home, you can follow that link, verify yourself, and then you're into the Providence ID system. And so we've taken that, demonstrated it. If you want to go to the next slide there, Ryan, we actually saw some really good lift here. We saw somewhere north of a 2.5x return on investment for the spend on doing identity this way. So we see better re-engagement. People register more successfully more often. Our Epic usage actually went way up because people are successfully registering and getting access to MyChart. And we're also seeing a lot more re-engagement and return of people into our digital ecosystem because of this. We synchronize not just our EMR, but also information from our data sources around patient personalization. So our next best actions are in this system. Our main website and My Account and payment portal are in this system. We're getting more of our additional ecosystem partners in this system. So if you're a patient for Providence now, it's universal across the entire ecosystem. And we saw value in this, and what Providence does is when we see value in something like this, we'll actually spin it into its own company. And so Praia Health is going to be that next startup from Providence. Providence previously launched Zelf and DexCare. This will be the next one that can provide the same identity service to any health system who wants to be a part of it out of the box. You don't have to develop your own solution. You don't have to pay a vendor to make it for you. It exists today. That's Praia.
What Robin is talking about is this idea that in the future, leading organizations like Providence are going to disambiguate their identity proofing service and their authentication layer from their back-end legacy systems and their API gateways as well. That information, that authentication layer that's doing identity proofing, as well as the API gateway layer, that is completely ambiguated from their back-end systems. That's really important. And it's really important because the world is not just EHRs any longer. Epic does a great job. It's crazy, though, to think that we have said the entire the entire country's healthcare problems should be resolved by one sector. That's just a crazy idea to think about. We have so many healthcare issues that need to be solved for. Let's figure out a community way to make that happen. And let's make sure we have an equal playing field so everyone can make that happen. So you're going to see more of this in the future. And Jason's going to talk a little bit more about ID.me and kind of what they're seeing in the market here in just shortly. So the second use case is what we call the Cures Gateway Architecture. So this is the IHE form of data exchange today on the clinical side, at least. They use these IHE protocols. Citizen is one of the groups within CARIN, and they've developed a little gateway architecture that works with any HIE that sits on top of it that basically said, hey, we're going to identity proof the patient. We're going to send these validated demographics through the network, and then the HIE is going to go out, because remember, an HIE by definition is an HIN according to ONC. Therefore, an HIE has to provide individual access services to individual patients. So they're going to send that information through the network, and then they're going to get responses back as well to make that happen. And they're going live with, I think, about 10 or 15 HIEs around the country going forward. The third use case, this is where Adam would come in, but I'll do my best Adam impersonation. But Adam McBride from HHS, who is the XMS project manager for this. HHS has what's called an XMS identity broker service. And what that does is it takes all of these different identity, these credentialing service providers that we have on the stage and others who we don't have, and be able to put them into one architecture, one XMS-based architecture. So then when you come to a portal, you'll come to a portal and say, log in again with your Epic MyChart account if you'd like to, or Humana's username and password for their member portal, or you can log in with XMS, and XMS would have a drop-down of all the identity providers that are certified to actually be in their system, and you can log in with ID.me, you can log in with Clear, you can log in with Praia, you can log in with all these other ones, and then that is how you actually authenticate yourself into the system. XMS has this live already. It's live and in production. It is working for their individual HHS employees and contractors that actually work there. And our hope is that we can see this actually promulgate itself to other federal agencies and other states in the future. So we'll see that happening, I think, in the months and years ahead. And then the final one is UDAP tiered OAuth, which is something that's actually pointed to in TEFCA. And so Kyle's going to talk a little bit about what tiered OAuth is.
Yeah, so a good way to sort of couch UDAP tiered OAuth is to sort of compare it with the goals of XMS. These two use cases were very similar in a lot of ways. The goal of both of them is to sort of provide an abstraction layer from a credential service provider such that when that credential service provider identity proofs a patient and they make an attestation about who this patient's identity is, these services, whether it's UDAP or XMS, allows that attestation to make its way in a trusted capacity to any variety of different healthcare institutions. So it sort of breaks free this pairwise connection that credential service providers have today with data holders, where instead this abstraction layer allows it to go anywhere. And Mickey did a great job of describing sort of how that works in the cell phone space, where you've got a carrier, but you can call anybody and using other carriers. That is sort of a similar concept. UDAP tiered OAuth is specifically, this particular capability aligns best with facilitated FHIR, where Mickey was talking about how you had QHINs, two separate QHINs, and they had participants under those QHINs. And you wanted those participants to be able to communicate directly with each other. UDAP is really 90% OpenID Connect, which is, of course, what FHIR supports and OAuth. The extra 10% is this interoperability layer that allows those two endpoints to dynamically communicate with each other, dynamically trust each other, and then start to exchange information with each other. So the best way to think about UDAP is OpenID Connect plus. OpenID Connect by itself does not actually have the machinery to allow you to trust anybody in an ecosystem. You have to manually make that work. UDAP sort of eliminates that manual step, so it's sort of auto magic.
Which means you don't have to have a business relationship, right, to be able to make this work at scale, which is one of the reasons that we anticipate that when you see the next version of TEFCA come out with FHIR, you'll see UDAP tiered OAuth as being part of that solution as we did. And that's why we wanted to make sure we tested it last year to see that it actually does work. So those were our 4 use cases. We learned a lot through this process. And again, I'm going to have Kyle kind of walk through just briefly some of the lessons learned we had and future considerations of where we want to test in the future.
How much time do we have?
Not much, probably about 5 minutes.
Whew, boy, that's a lot to pack in 5 minutes. So I'll be really quick. A couple of things that we learned was EHR systems are really the destination, right? That's where all the data is housed. So eventually we need to be able to interoperate with these EHRs. They have testing today, right? The challenge is the test data that they use is not the same test data that credential service providers use. So we realized immediately when we do future FHIR pilots where these credential service providers are involved with OpenID Connect, you got to use the same test patients. They're already in the EHR system. We got to have the CSPs put them in their system so that you can rely on that same test suite, not only so that you have demographics that can be shared with the EHR system, but also so you can return test health data for this fictitious user. So that was one of the early things we realized is that's an important step in these pilots. And also making sure that the credential service providers, and for that matter, the EHR systems, both support OpenID Connect standard claims. We realized that was not actually the case. So the various information that's being sent from a credential service provider to an EHR system is not necessarily standardized all the time. So making sure that everybody is standardized, as we all know is important, is another piece here. We also, in terms of, you can skip this one, Ryan, I think that's in the interest of time. Right, so stakeholder involvement is also important. There is really digital identity often is discussed from a technical capacity, but the reality is the real limitation is the legal. Put simply, if somebody gets it wrong, who do I sue, right? That's kind of a problem, especially if there's no business relationship with the party who's relying on this identity credential. So the whole purpose of a trust framework is to solve that problem. And involving the legal and CISOs within these pilots is very important. Even if they don't play a role specifically, keeping them informed and aware of what's going on is going to be important to help these organizations participate in this kind of ecosystem going forward.
Awesome. So our path toward federation as a country is really going to be using either this XMS service and or the UDAP tiered OAuth protocol. So you're going to see this actually start to promulgate, especially starting next year as we dive into fire pilots as ONC, as Mickey talked about earlier. I want to say that this can't be done by the private sector alone, and it can't be done by the public sector alone. This gives you a timeline of actually how the work that we are doing in CARIN relates to the work that ONC is doing, and CMS is doing, and TEFCA and Sequoia Project is doing. All of this is actually related to each other. We first recommended it way back in 2017 when the NIST guidelines first came out. We've been working on it for almost 6 years, actually, and then it started to promulgate from that. Then TEFCA pointed to it, and then TEFCA said, this is the way individual access services is supposed to be used. Here's what all this means. It means that every single payer and provider who participates in TEFCA will have to accept one of these IAL2 credentials into their system when they go live on TEFCA Fire. That's really what all of this means. It means that you as a patient have the option now of proving your identity one time with one of these trusted entities and then being able to use that credential once TEFCA Fire goes live around the country anywhere on any portal, anywhere in the country. That's the value of what this looks like, and that's a step towards patients getting full access to their information. So where are we doing this in production? Mickey mentioned this actually in his comments. Governor Cox came to Levitt Partners last year and said, we want to implement fire everywhere. He didn't actually say that. He doesn't know what fire is per se, but he said, we really want to improve healthcare interoperability in our state everywhere. What do we need to do? And we said, implement fire everywhere. That's a great idea, and digital identity and all the other stuff we're talking about, including public health, commercial health plans, and everything. And he says, great, we're all in. So we are, under the governor's direction, have convened the largest fire pilot in the entire country. It's in the state of Utah. It's got all the major HCA, Intermountain, University of Utah, Evernorth, Cambia, Select Health, I'm going to miss people, and Molina, all of these entities, public health as well, Medicaid, to say, how are we going to actually do this? What does actually this look like at scale? And we've done these six use cases. One of them is digital identity as well. So look for other additional information. If you're in the state of Utah, you're going to be beneficiaries of that. If you're not, stay tuned. It may come to a state near you soon. All right, with that, Jason, let me give you the last word. ID.me has been in this for a long time. I always joke that Blake Hall is your CEO. He taught me everything I need to know about identity, right? In a basement of a hotel, of a HIMSS, whatever, that Sahara hotel place, right, related to where he was going on 6 years ago. But give us a sense of like ID.me, where you guys, what you have learned through this process and actually how it's working in healthcare.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ryan. So, I mean, the key to digital identity working for healthcare interoperability is equity, trust, and portability. And so just a couple quick stories about what we've seen in the market. Equity. So just last month, we have a story of an unhoused individual who needed government benefits from a shelter, logging in, verified identity, and was able to receive benefits because of the way that we provide digital identity credentials. We offer multiple ways for people to verify. So it doesn't require a smartphone. It doesn't require complex historical documentation. It requires the latest abilities to actually verify that an individual is who they say they are, and once identified, they can take that access anywhere that accepts the credential. And that's critical for healthcare because not everyone has a smartphone. Not everyone has different levels of government identification. And so verifying those individuals to receive healthcare is primary to the success of interoperability. The second piece is ease. And a lot of the ancient ways of identity verification required accessing knowledge-based questions. And I don't know about you, but I can't remember every single address and phone number that I've ever had. And the failure rates are very high. And so we've replaced those knowledge-based questions, and then we can step people up all the way to the IL2 standard to allow them to access PII, PHI, and other protected information in a way that we can typically get someone who has failed multiple prior times before access within a few minutes. And so one example is we were working with a customer who was working on electronic prescription for controlled substance access. This provider, through their network, had failed for the last 6 weeks trying to verify identity and write a controlled substance prescription. When they activated our service, he was verified in 3 minutes. And that's key to healthcare interoperability from the patient side and the provider side, is that we don't restrict or prevent you from getting the access, the information, and the control that you need to navigate healthcare. And then finally, portability. Once you're verified, you can take that credential anywhere. Just like today, when you're in person and you walk in somewhere, what do they ask you for? Your driver's license. That's your identity credential that everyone trusts and accepts no matter where you go, because it's a trusted credential. And that's the standard that we're working to and have created online, is that it's a trusted credential. When we pass it to a receiver, they accept that this person with a very high confidence rate is who they say they are. And that's the key to working healthcare interoperability, so that when you go log into primary care, emergency care, urgent care, patient healthcare access, pharmacy, wherever you go, they say, this is that person. I'm going to provide them with access to their information and connect them to the network so that they can get the benefits that they need right now.
Super important point Jason made. One in particular, the same infrastructure for consumers can be used for providers. That's, I think, the really important point, is that prescribers who do electronic prescribing of controlled substances also have to be identity proof. So these providers are logging into portals all day long too, and it's, again, burden for providers. That's a dumb thing providers should do. Let's make sure providers are providing care. That's what they went to school for. And let's figure out a way to make that streamlined and easier for them to make happen. All right, so with that, I think we are done. You have QR codes about where you can access the reports that we actually had done there. If you want to take pictures of it here, you're welcome to reach out to us. I think we've got about 5 minutes, Michael, for some questions as well. And we'd love to talk to you about this topic that we feel so passionately about. Yes, here in the front.
Oh, I wanted to ask Jason one thing first. Our pandas are on the way to the airport. Is there any way you can get the State Department to cancel their exit visa? We're losing them today. This is it.
We'll go into the identity database, and we'll remove their access so they can't fly.
That's it. That's all we care.
Hi, thank you. This is really good information. I understood probably 10% or less. So my background is in administrative transactions, and you know, we're looking to learn a lot of new stuff. So this is really good. And my organization also is part of CARIN Alliance with Paradigm Allscripts. And so my question is, with all this technical information and the credential and everything, where does that kind of fit with smaller providers, smaller systems? So, you know, that was obviously very technical, and, you know, a lot of providers' offices don't have access to that level of technical. So do we on the administrative side kind of sit back and say, let's look to our EMRs to take the lead on that? I mean, how do we help integrate these types of concepts, or is that in another part of our industry to lead that?
Jason, isn't Allscripts a ID.me? Tina bought your service, right?
Yeah, we have regular meetings with Paradigm, and I guess the short answer to that question is yes. The platform providers need to adopt the portable trusted credential standards going forward. And that's what the trust framework is basically building out for them. So whether they use our service or another credential service provider, once they log in, they'll be able to accept that, provide access, and transport that identity. But that is in progress right now. And so that's one of the initiatives that we're working on with a slew of customers, including Veradigm, is how do you accept this standard? Where do you start? And it's not a low lift from the platform provider view, right? Because they already have some level of credential access through the multi-factor authentication services that they use to control access to their systems from their staff and their providers. And now they need to add another level of verification. But once they choose a CSP that's portable and trusted, that's the last time they'll have to verify everyone ever again. And today, that's still a problem because if they shut down one MFA application and they go with another, they have to re-verify, re-authenticate. And authentication is different than identity verification. Identity verification is universal and portable. Authentication is single organization, single access accountability. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Quickly, go ahead.
Yeah, and one more piece on that, an analogy that might help. We're still early days, right? Most of us in the room probably don't know what happens when you walk up to, let's say, a small merchant. Some of that maybe even has a square thing you check out with, and you swipe your credit card, and all this magic happens, and somehow money leaves your account and goes into theirs, right? The same thing can happen here. There's a lot of standards, a lot of technology going on behind the scenes that allow these various organizations to participate in the trust framework of Visa or MasterCard or whatever it is. This is very analogous. So eventually fire servers using standards-based capabilities, potentially with one of these use cases, will be able to just accept it so that you don't have that burden. You can just purchase something, put it in place, and then it's allowed to interpret the ecosystem of digital identity in that way. So that's one way to look at it.
We have time for one more question. Any more questions?
Is this working? Yeah, it's working. With the level of information about a patient that's being passed around, how have you addressed the topic of consent?
All of these guys respond. I think what's really important is that none of this patient moves without an actionable movement by the patient, okay? So for example, today, the patient logs into a portal and says, I want access to my health information via that portal. That is the consent that's implied in that process because there's not a ghost that's actually logging in, okay? Similar to this process, you are actually authenticating yourself and identity proofing yourself and going to authenticate and log in to an application, and that you're going to consent for allow that application. There's a big consent screen that comes up when you go through this process to say, I want this application to accept my information. Anything else you guys would add to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the Praia side, the patient identity is the core piece. So there's if you've seen the slide, you'll notice there's a data sharing portion on top of identity, and the identity piece must be in place. So the patient must sign up, they must consent, and the application that they're getting access from must have their credential to continue on the process. So everything is centered around the patient's identity and the patient's consent to proceed. So you can't step anywhere without that patient consent first.
And we do 2 layers of that as well. So when we integrate with a new platform provider, we only give them the information that they can substantiate that they need. So we might have 40 pieces of criteria, and they only get 6 because that's their business use case. So that's the first step. The second is when the patient comes through and is already verified, but now they're accessing a new platform. When they log in through that portal, it'll say, we're going to share these 6 pieces of information with this organization. Do you consent? And they can see it right there. And they can say no, or they can say yes. And when they say yes, we pass those 6 pieces of information. That passes over, and they know what they've shared with whom, and they can always go back into their wallet and remove that access at any time. So the patient controls that sensitive information.
But no one can see this, but back to the driver's license example, this shows a proof of what I shared with the Transportation Security Administration, all the pieces of data that I shared. And it also says that the TSA deletes that immediately after they've gone through the identity proofing process. So it's the right be forgotten is actually immediate on that. But at least it's transparent as actually what information was shared. And we'll get to a point soon where that information can be self-selected, where when you go into a bar, you're not sharing your address, you're just sharing the fact that you're over 21. That's also an ability to make that happen.
And Ryan,
Yes, go
one
ahead.
last piece on that is what Jason correctly described is not a proprietary capability. This is built right into OAuth. You have to consent to sharing the information before you can proceed. So that's probably one of the most important capabilities here is consent is actually built right in to the API.
Great point. Anything else online, Michael? Okay.
Nope, we're good.
Thank you all very much for the time.